All right, so next speaker we have for you is Miriam Kalamian. Is she ready? And so Miriam, you guys, I met her a few years ago, got to interview her on the Living La Vida Low Carb show. She was all about helping cancer patients. And cancer is one of these areas where keto helps with, and she was physically trying to walk people through this because there's so much research, but there was really nobody to help kind of talk about it in the day-to-day. So she's really good at talking to people, but she's going to talk to you guys about something that I think is really important. How many of you in your life have a support system that everybody in your life loves keto and thinks it's the best thing that ever happened to you? Anybody? Bueller? No, it doesn't happen. You've got actually saboteurs that claim to be on your side saying, hey, look, we don't think that keto thing is so good. You can't eat all that fat. Anybody heard that one before? Or how are you supposed to have the energy if you don't have any carbs? Oh my gosh, I could never give up bread. They mean well, and yet they're saboteurs, right? And so we have the skeptics out there, we have the saboteurs, and that's what Miriam Kalamian is going to talk about. Is Miriam ready? I can't see. 30 more seconds, they said. Okay. So she's a really great speaker, you guys. I really hope you give her a warm round of applause. You like how I'm stalling here? A nice KetoCon welcome to Miriam Kalamian.
It's wonderful to be here today. I love being in the low-carb community. For a long time, cancer was sort of something different, and Eric Westman said we're cross-pollinating now, and I love that. So, as Jimmy said, thank you, Jimmy, my area of specialization is implementation of the ketogenic diet as an adjunct therapy for cancer. And when I say adjunct, I mean it as an add-on. It's not a standalone therapy in cancer as it might be in other things. And in my decade of professional and personal experience with the diet, I have run into more than my share of skeptics and saboteurs, and I brought a sampling of them today to share with you. Nothing to disclose. So, it's important. I mean, you know the importance of the diet. I don't have to go into that, but you have to listen to your inner voice because there's a lot of things that are going to get in the way of that, including you. So if you're trash talking yourself, you've got to get past that. So your community, your family, your friends, they can be your biggest supporters or they can be the worst skeptics and saboteurs. So look at them carefully and see where you can get some support. Yes, the doctor will see you now, but I don't promise he'll talk to you, but he'll see you. Well, I hope he's going to listen. This guy, now, what are you going to do if this guy is your doctor? Does he look ready to listen? And this kind of behavior unfortunately happens a lot in my world. The eye rolling, the shouting, the bullying, the intimidation. And not only is it unprofessional, it's just totally unacceptable, and it's a red flag for how you're going to be treated. So I would say you can look for a new doctor starting right now. Chrissy said she had to fire hers too. This is great. People don't often see the positive side of this. If your doctor says, diet doesn't matter, eat what you want, then that's a green light. So you can go ahead and start a ketogenic diet. Because diet is a choice. So if you look at this and you go, yum, or I'm going to save it for a carb cheat day, then you've got some work to do. But in my world, this is often presented as something that you should be doing. The American Cancer Society, and I'm not disparaging them, I'm just pointing this out, use ice cream as a topping on cake. Well, unless this is totally keto-friendly, obviously this is not what I believe is the way to go. You need to eat a balanced diet. This is a very well-intentioned saboteur. All the best intentions, really believes that eating a balanced diet is what you need to do. So I say it's all about nutrition, and these guys have it figured out. They're getting the vitamins and minerals and the essential nutrients in what they've chosen to eat. And if we look at our diets in the same way, we can also get diets that are nutritionally complete. And something to keep in mind, no dietary requirement for carbohydrates. And in humans, as opposed to these guys, we can get polyphenols from coffee and chocolate, and I particularly like that. Cancer is a genetic disease and not a metabolic one. We've been hearing that for way too long, and there are some really compelling reasons that we should rethink this. So this could be a presentation all in itself, so I'm just going to quickly go through the timeline here. Nobel laureate Otto Warburg, back in 1924, observed that cancer cell metabolism was different than normal cells. And his observation was called the Warburg effect. And in particular, what cancer cells do is ferment a lot of glucose. Even when they could be running it through the mitochondrial pathway, that's much more efficient. But then along in 1953, Watson and Crick came along. They introduced their model of, DNA. There's the DNA double helix, all very familiar to us, and the genetic theory of cancer was born. Shortly after that, as we began to discover genetic mutations in cancer. And then in 2005, Dr. Seyfried and colleagues, Boston College, revived the Warburg hypothesis, but he was looking at the underlying mechanism there instead of the genetics of the tumor. What's the underlying mechanism? Cancer cells ferment glucose. So this is something, again, a well-meaning saboteur could say to you, but you'll mess up your hormones. And I have heard people say that, and it's true. Thyroid-stimulating hormone goes up in the early weeks and months of a diet. A woman may miss her period, her menstrual period, because of the changes that her body is going through with the diet. But not all of these hormone changes are bad. And I have to say, in cancer treatment, you're going to have these side effects. You're going to have effect on thyroid. You're going to have an effect on menstrual cycle. And it's going to come with a lot of other bad side effects, too. So diet detractors are going to ignore or marginalize the positive impacts on hormones. A ketogenic diet normalizes hormones that regulate appetite. So they're insulin, leptin, ghrelin, they're all hormones. Lowers the level of IGF-1. Now, in cancer, that's really important because it's an anabolic hormone that's associated with cancer progression. And a ketogenic diet is going to improve insulin sensitivity, and that has universally positive effects even for people with cancer. So I'm going to stray a little bit because we're still talking about hormones and polycystic ovary syndrome. Devastating for the women who are suffering with this. And back in 2005, this was a short study. There's been some new research since, but I really like this one. 5 women completed a 24-week study. And that's the results, the impact on their hormones. And this is a tremendous response. And this is even better. 2 of these 5 women who had previously been infertile became pregnant during this time. So, high-fat diets cause insulin resistance. High-fat diet, high-fat diet, high-fat diet. And this is why. Because high-fat diet is not the same as a ketogenic diet. High-fat diet is defined as, in the research, 45% fat. This is not high-fat ketogenic diet. It's defined in the research, low-carb is defined as 30% of the calories coming from carbs. So it's not a very low-carb ketogenic diet. So the fact is that very low-carb ketogenic diets do improve insulin sensitivity. But this is part of the reason why we have this disconnect in the research world. This is Black 6. He is a genetically engineered mouse model that becomes reliably obese and diabetic in a very short period of time, usually to match the 8 weeks of a study. And I checked just recently, and 1,588 studies will say high-fat, if you do a PubMed search of high-fat diet and this particular mouse model, you'll find those studies. But his diet, this is it right here. Let's walk through it. 45% fat, 20% protein, 35% carb, and half of that is sucrose. So in the equivalent 2,000 calorie a day diet for a human, that's about 20 teaspoons of sugar. So let's compare it to this Layers of Love brownie, and this is a real thing. You could Google it and find it. 49% fat, 5% protein, 46% carb. So we could expect this would have even a worse effect for this mouse, but he'd probably enjoy it more. You can't starve your cancer of glucose. And this is something that I was told, and it is true. You can't starve your cancer of glucose. There's more to it than that. Blood glucose levels do stay within physiological norms, even in those on a ketogenic diet. And if our liver wasn't capable of making the sugar that we need, then we wouldn't have survived past our first missed meal. So it's important that our bodies do this. But this is what's different. This is the difference between normal cells and cancer cells. So in a normal cell, you're bringing glucose into the cell. It has to be converted to pyruvate before it can do anything in the cell. And most of that pyruvate in a normal, healthy cell is going to go through the mitochondria of that cell and be oxidized for energy. Very efficient process, very high yield. Cancer cells are different. In a cancer cell, most of that pyruvate is instead diverted to another pathway within the cytoplasm of the cell, and there it's fermenting, and it's fermenting into lactic acid. Lactic acid is basically, it's toxic, needs to be put out of the cell, shuttled out of the cell into the microenvironment, and you can see that inflammation is happening in the microenvironment of the cell. It drops the pH, raises the acidity, and cancer cell proliferation and disease progression are associated with that inflammatory state. So we're not just starving cancer. That's a really simplistic way to look at it. What we're doing with meal composition and timing is that we are changing the epigenetics. We are inhibiting pathways that are associated with cancer progression, and we're upregulating activities in the pathways that are associated with health. If there was evidence, I would have read about it in my journals. Well, let me tell you, any one of you could go onto PubMed and do a search, and you're going to find some evidence in the journals, peer-reviewed journals. But it's largely ignored as being not relevant in their world. And this is why. They're not interested. I'm going to translate for you. I'm not interested in what you found, either in papers or on the internet, until they're hearing this from the people that make the guidelines for them. They're not going to change practice. You'll lose weight. Well, we do know that about a ketogenic diet, that it is a great weight loss diet, but the fear here is something else entirely. It's not the intended weight loss, it is cachexia. But cachexia is not related to ketogenic diet. Cachexia is a cascade of, it's a catabolic cascade, and it attacks muscle and fat and just depletes the body. And it's a very poor syndrome, and is associated with mortality, especially in cancers like pancreatic cancer and colon cancer. So of course they're afraid. The medical community is afraid of weight loss because they just immediately go to this idea of cachexia. You'll get kidney stones or gout, and this has gotten far too much play. There is an increased risk, a slightly increased risk of kidney stones, and there is a marker, uric acid levels. There's a marker that changes in a ketogenic diet, but it's not necessarily going to create gout. So for kidney stones, stay really well hydrated, drink plenty of water, and know that there are some measures that you can take, proactive measures, if you have a personal or family history. Visit with your renal specialist before you start. There are certain foods and supplements that you may want to avoid, and there is a prescription medication that can help reduce the risk of kidney stones. And the reason for all this fear about gout is that ketones compete with uric acid for excretion. We know that. So in the beginning, while your body is adapting, your uric acid levels may rise. But that normally resolves after a few months on the diet. And in my case, and I've worked with over 500 people, I have never seen a ketogenic diet, even in those with an increased uric acid level, develop gout as a result of this disease. In fact, there's some interesting work coming out on the effect of beta-hydroxybutyrate in deactivating the inflammasome related to gout flares. So if that is an issue or concern for you, you can read about it. Why aren't I going to my next slide? Okay. High-fat diet will raise your cholesterol. Well, in my world, this is not really a priority, and we have some great information. I mean, there's Keto Clarity, and there's the work of Jeff Gerber and Ivor Cummins, and the great taking apart of the statistics by David Diamond. So this is not going to be a concern for me. Okay. The lipid hypothesis was never proven. In fact, it ignores the science. And, I think we should all rest easy about that. And I want to present a special case here. This was a client of mine. He was a couple years out from a diagnosis of a very aggressive brain cancer, so we were very fortunate he was a couple years out. No history of heart disease. And he had just been told that he had 3 more months. So what happens here is doctor orders a lipid panel. And that's the result of his panel. So even in the best of worlds, this guy's 24. Why did the same doctor that told him he had 3 months to live, why did she even order a panel? Get everybody all worked up into a frenzy over this. Did she really think he was going to die of heart disease? This is a relatively new one. You might lose the chance to put your affairs in order. And I'm not going to name names, but I do have the reference in there, so you could look it up on your own. This is so damaging for somebody to hear something like this. But that's not going to change. Unfortunately, as damaging as it is, it's not going to change practice. So they're not looking at what's good for the patient. They're looking at an entirely different set of guidelines. So I want to just kind of briefly walk you through another one that happened so recently that I didn't even have time to mount it as a slide. And that is, I have a client, again, with glioblastoma multiforme, a really devastating, aggressive brain cancer. And he's in a clinical trial, and he tells the doctor that he is planning to implement the ketogenic diet. And she says, well, if you do this diet and you have a good response, then how will we know if it's the diet or the drug? So this is so crazy, because what does that mean to him? That this is, he doesn't care. He's just looking for a longer life. And yes, her study is important to her, but that's just another example of the disconnect. And also kind of a light in the wilderness, because she's acknowledging on one level that the diet may have an effect. So here's some other unwelcome commentary. It's acidic. Ketogenic diet is acidic. Well, I think you're all in a good place on that one. Meat is bad for cancer. Prove it. It's unhealthy long term. In fact, there are studies now, we're finally getting to see some longer term studies. It is not unhealthy if it's a well-formulated ketogenic diet. You won't be able to exercise. people in my world do believe this because there is some information out there about exercise raising blood glucose levels. But we don't really have time to address it here, but resistance exercise is still really a good thing if done in moderation. And of course, the diet is unpalatable. And if you're here, you probably know that that one's certainly not true. So why should we start even considering a ketogenic diet if we don't have all the science in, if we don't know exactly what cancers it's going to work for and how much impact it's going to have? And I argue for this because people with cancer don't have the luxury of time. There has been no real significant progress. We're stuck in a holding pattern despite what we're hearing about targeted therapies. So start now. So my son Rafi had brain cancer. And I am just so grateful that I was able to tune out all of those skeptics and saboteurs that wanted to get between us and doing what we thought was right for our son. And I'm just so glad I listened to my inner voice, and the inner voice said, what could possibly be wrong with at least giving this a try? And I have to say, the results of him being on this diet were just stunning. In just a couple of months, a ketogenic diet had made more of an impact on cancer cell metabolism than any of the therapies we had put him through in 2.5 years, and with none of the side effects of those therapies. And I love this picture because we were about 5 years out from ketogenic diet here, and we were in the Baja, and living life, enjoying things. We were out on a small fishing boat, a panga, and the pilot of the boat, he cut the engine. It was dead calm, and within a few minutes, a mother gray whale brought her calf over to us. And it was just an amazing experience for us to be out there making memories when, if we had just continued on with what we were doing, he wouldn't have even been with us at that point. Or if he had, he would have been too compromised that he wouldn't have been able to enjoy that moment. So, just listen to that inner voice. Thank you. One more thing. I want to add that I've put some of Rafi's story, I've woven that into a book that I have on cancer. It's the most comprehensive book on ketogenic diet for cancer, for practitioners and for lay people alike. And I hope you'll stay connected through my website or through email contact with me. I love to hear your stories. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Now I'm embarrassed. So none of my kids, thankfully, have any serious health problems. But I see that your experience with your son, maybe you can help to inform some of those of us struggling with the biggest sabotage to a keto diet is not for ourselves, but for our children.
I'm not sure I heard all of that question.
I'm sorry. I don't find my personality as subject to people trying to sabotage my own keto diet, but I'm really struggling with my children's diet being sabotaged. And it's very hard for me to watch. I'm sorry.
Okay, listen.
I don't think that my children really have the willpower to resist what our culture is throwing at them, and they're keto at home, and every time they go out to an activity, they're being fed these lies in addition to the actual food. How do we as parents use the information that we have to protect our children when it's so disrespected in the mainstream? And how do we shore up our children to be able to also stand up to this sabotage?
Okay, it's a great question with a lot of parts to it. And let me say that My answer is going to vary depending on why you would be doing a ketogenic diet for a child. I'm a strong proponent of using it for cancer and for the dysregulated metabolism for straightening people out. What we did, I can share what we did, was we just fortified him with information. We told him why he was doing it, and we told him what he was going to face out there, and we gave him some strategies. We armed him with some strategies. And for the people that he came in contact with at school, we educated and informed, and yes, there were people that resisted, and yes, there were people that undermined our efforts, but he would usually rat them out to us. And I can remember one time taking him to a restaurant. We were traveling, and he's looking through the menu, and it's occurring to him as he's looking through it, he just says, "This is all crap." And I went, "Yeah, you're right, honey, but we're just going to have to deal with something, so let's find the least offensive food we can right now." And that was out of a 10-year-old. So, the kids can be a part of this, but you really do have to educate and inform people in the environment if you want this to be successful for a child. But also be clear about why you're doing this for a child. In a normal, healthy, developing child, there are some reasons, I believe, not to go strictly ketogenic.
Hi, I have more of a comment than a question. I wanted to thank you for sharing your story. Joe here was diagnosed with Prader-Willi syndrome at 8 weeks. For those who don't know, it's a very rare genetic disorder that he had a life expectancy of 22 years because they have insatiable hunger. So we'd literally have to lock our cabinets and our refrigerators because he would eat until his stomach bursted. And the reason of death would be because of gastric distress, diabetes, heart failure. And so we started on, at an appropriate age, because we wanted to make sure his brain was developing, but we started on a study last year going full keto. And it was sponsored by Gary Taubes and Beth Zubak from the Charlie Foundation.
Yes.
And so what we're seeing is dramatic effects. I mean, he would wake up in the morning crying for food, and now he wakes up and he goes plays. I mean, he still will want to sneak.
Yes.
And as you guys can see, he looks like a typical weight for a first grader. So I just want to say it's amazing this effect that this diet can have on not only cancer, but so many other disease states that we do have a metabolic. So thank you for spreading the word.
And thank you for bringing that up. Yes. My son had hypothalamic obesity and hypothalamic eating disorder because of the position, the placement, location of the tumor in his brain. And he was like a hungry little bear 24/7. I couldn't even turn around, and he'd be out eating windfall pears with hornets in them, or out eating green tomatoes on the vine. And when we started him on the ketogenic diet, there was a transition period in there, but it did, that was part of the quality of life, is it improved that. He was no longer, he no longer was driven by that hypothalamic eating disorder, and he dropped the weight, so he was no longer obese.
Hi, Miriam. Oh, is this on? Yep, it's on. Great. I just want to say thank you again. It's always such a joy to listen to you speak. I've had the privilege of doing so several times. And I just wanted to say the piece around uric acid building up. When I started keto for my epilepsy 3 years ago, I had my uric acid go through the roof. But my belief is that the reason it went through the roof is that the physicians who were quote unquote supporting me, who knew nothing at all and I was actually educating, were asking me to go on mega doses of vitamin C, believing that I would not get adequate vitamin C from my own nutrition. And as a result, my uric acid sedimented and I had very high levels. The minute I stopped supplementing with vitamin C and just ate more liver and a little bit more red pepper, I was golden, uric acid in check, everything good. So I just wanted to say that that's also a big sabotage, is the what are you missing from your diet, and to encourage people to really make sure that they do have a well-formulated diet, to make sure that that's not an issue.
I think that's really important, the well-formulated part, and that's part of why I suggest people track with tools like Chronometer. And our need for vitamin C is very low. I mean, the actual amount that keeps us from becoming deficient is pretty low. So megadosing with vitamin C is not recommended on this diet. Thank you.